of the 1805 schoolhouse, I became interested to find out more about where the schoolhouse was located and what the district was. And one of the misconceptions in, that's often repeated is someone asks, how many school districts were there in the town of Essex? And say, oh, there were 14. Well, yeah, at one point there were 14, but there were a lot of variation. It was very much of a dynamic process, the way that the school districts came to be. Well, we're going to work to do it this way. So anyway, just a quick review of where we were in Essex. A lot of stuff going on here. The French and Indian War. Essex was chartered in 1763. It's an interesting date to remember. Vermont population, the whole of Vermont, was about 7,800. Of course, the American Revolution is going on. Meanwhile, they're trying to write a constitution in Vermont. Carleton's raid, the British were still raiding the Champlain Valley. It was a hotbed here. There were Indian raids, the Royalton raids. It was an unsettled area. So even though the town was chartered in 1763, there wasn't a whole lot of settlement going on because things were pretty much in turmoil here. So let's get going. 1783, we have the Treaty of Paris that ends the Revolution. And this is when the first settlers arrived in Essex. Matter of fact, Mr. Butler, when he wrote the history of Essex, he said they celebrated the 100th centennial of Essex in 1783. He said, why 1783? The town was chartered in 1763. Well, it was because 1783 was when really the settlers really started pouring into Essex. Things had settled down. The first entry in any of the town records didn't occur until 1786. And there's a mention, I think, in Butler's history where he says the first school was taught, as our recollections, as we try to remember, in 1788, but I could never find anything specifically about that. 354 souls in Essex in 1791, about 100 school-aged children then, and it wasn't until 1796, okay, this is 13 years after 1783, where there's the first time that there's any mention about schools in the town record. And this is when it was first voted that the northeast part of said town to be set off into a school district. The same to extend from westward south line on the east side of Browns River, so-called, up said river, Alderbrook, so-called, thence to the east line of said town. So here we go with this first picture of this map. Now this map, by the way, Jerry Fox had found this in the John Johnson papers at UVM. And we're still not really certain, I don't think we've really settled it, have we, Jerry, about the date of this map, but we think it might have been the draft for the final map that John Johnson prepared when they did the reallocation or re-subdivision, if you will, of the whole town. So it's not real clear here, but the important thing is you'll get the geography. Now, this map, this is the Browns River coming down. The way that description is said down along the Browns River to the point where Alder Brook enters Browns River. Well, Alder Brook it comes down into Essex Center, and it used to loop through Essex Center and go up and hook onto the Browns River about here. The flood of 1830 wiped out the dam that was there, and now Alder Brook goes down to Winooski that way. So anyway, so that description talks about where Alder Brook entered Browns River, and then easterly. So that was the first school district. One school district, did cover the whole, just one part of the town. These two people here, Gideon Curtis and William Ingraham, these two dots here, they represent where they lived. They relinquished themselves from the district. That was the first and only time I ever saw those words again in the town records, where they relinquished from the district. But apparently they didn't want to participate either in the funding or any other of the matters of the district. 1763, the charter, and these are boilerplate charters that Benny Wentworth put together, and there was one part of it said, one share for the benefit of a school in said town. A share amounted to 330 acres. In 1777, the Vermont Constitution, schools shall be established in each town by the legislature. Government wants to get their fingers in establishing schools. 1782, first school law empowered but did not require towns to establish the school districts. 1786, they got their head about them and said, okay, the schools ought to be maintained in each town. They didn't want to be involved. They left it up to the towns. That becomes important because there became a lot of autonomy within these school districts. The trustees of the town were to appoint and remove schoolmasters. Hiring of schoolmasters and called meeting given to the school districts. Again, like I say, a lot of autonomy in the school districts. 1797. This was the act to the support of schools, the chief centralizing factor in the educational affairs. This is from a book by Hubie. Each town shall keep and support a school or schools for the instruction of youth, and they required certain statistical data to be collected. This was the key of the research as I got into the town records to see how these school districts evolved and the numbers of students and so on that attended these school districts. In 1797, Westford actually divided their whole town into 4 school districts. 1799, Essex, because they owned the town, the trustees or the select board of the town, they controlled the school lands, so they were considering about leasing the school lands, which they ultimately did later on. Didn't take any action on that. 1800, we got 729 people here. Burlington's a roaring 815. Charlotte, look at the numbers there. A lot of people in Charlotte. That's where the people were settling along the lake. Essex population had doubled in just 9 years. Finally, 1801. Finally, 1801. Remember, 1783. We're now 18 years after the first settlers came in here when they finally decide they want to set up the whole town. And here it is. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but anyway, this is the way they described how the districts were set up. And it says, beginning on the Onion River, halfway between LeMille Messonniers, now dwelling house, and David Stan's, and extending then to James Pelton's bridge, down the Little River, straight line running north town by Samuel Bradley, Billy Hatch. They used people's names where they lived to determine where these boundaries were. So this map that I have here, this map and also the map, John Johnson's map of 1807, which we'll talk about in a bit, were key because they listed the names of people. So I was able to determine where these folks lived and could say, okay, here's where the boundary was. It goes along between these two people. So they split up the whole town into these 6 districts, and they named them by directions, primarily geographic directions. As you can see in the last line here, to be known by the names of Southwest and Northwest districts. Up here, you can see the name of the middle or center district. See, they couldn't even decide. Were we going to call it the middle district or call it the center district? So, and you'll see how the naming conventions kind of rolled around a little bit. The meeting wasn't even ordered. They had a second amendment where somebody said, wait a minute. We want to establish a district, we want to split out another little spot here, and they established another district down near well, they call it the Onion River, the Winooski River, and again described by the farm by Isaac Andrews, etc. So, and then would include, and I couldn't catch the name, Larrabee. These are all transcriptions from the town records. And this is what it looked like. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 districts in 1801. So you see they're rather large, but at least they now had some definition for the districts. They named trustees for each of the districts, and anyone that's done history research in Essex will recognize a lot of these names. David Tyler, Nathaniel Blood, Samuel Buell, Abel Castle, etc. Again, here are the names by generally geographic or other compass-related descriptions. So now that at least there's something started, if you will. This was, I like this quote because it says, and I'll read it, from the time of the first legislative act, a school district could be created, abolished, or united with another by vote of the town. Also, a town had power to set a citizen from one district to another. We'll see some of that. Such changes were comparatively frequent and were occasioned chiefly by local feuds or by dissatisfaction with the administration of school district affairs. Feuds, we know about that here in Essex. School districts of 1804. Now we voted, see, it was 1801. Now just 3 years later, we're starting to split things up a little bit more. And I won't read each one of these, but they had 3 different votes, how they split these districts, making them a little smaller. Someone often commented, well, how big was a district? Well, it should be within walking distance. Well, my God, some people had a long walk here for some of these districts, all right? But anyway, there's progress. There's, again, this is from the town record. These were voted on at town meetings. This is an example in 1806, and you can see here, there's even confusion here, southeast or southeasterly, northeast or northeasterly, again, middle or center district. So sometimes they even when they were reporting, they weren't even certain of what they wanted to call the district. And you can see the number of students, not small numbers, you know, 56 people, in the center district, 38. A total of 320 kids. These are kids from 5 to 18. So this is an example of the way that it would be recorded in the town records. Essex, March 11th, 1806, a list of scholars in the South Middle Districts from 4 years, excuse me, I misspoke there, from 4 years old to 18 or 25. This was attested by Thomas Chipman, who was the district clerk, and it was recorded by Nathan Castle, the town clerk. Now, Essex was a kind of a mess, all right, as far as land was concerned. There were people that had deeds. They weren't recorded properly. They were probably squatters. So, and of course, you know, the man's got to get his tax money, all right? So you got to determine who owns what. And so in 1804, the Essex petitioned the legislature to be permitted to divide their lands in servality, which in essence meant reestablishing or I call it reallocating all of the land that was in Essex. They gave the okay. John Johnson was hired, very prominent man, did architecture, engineer, did the trove of information at university on John Johnson. So in 1807, he produced this map, and the land allocations were recorded. We believe that the original map that John Johnson produced is the map that is hanging on the wall in the town office's conference room. And by the way, we think, some of us have talked about this, that it needs to be either in a better place or it needs to be preserved better. It probably doesn't have the right glass or whatever. But anyway, we believe that is the original map. This map here, again, we believe that it was a draft for that map. Again, that map shows people's names, and it shows acreages for each of these lots. So they did this in 1804, and in 3 years, they came up with this land division, which I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall as to how they made some of these decisions, because the way things ended up. Anyway, this is a reproduction of that map that is on the wall in the town offices. And it's a true reproduction. And it shows the roads, and of course shows the rivers, and it's a little hard to see here, but you can see each one of these parcels is denoted. It has a parcel number, and there is a name. And this was key map in determining, interpreting some of those district descriptions between the land of Joe Blow and Harry Sue, okay? Well, could see where they lived, and anyway, determining some of these boundaries without doing extensive title research is difficult. And title researching takes tremendous amount of time. So we did not get into that because, again, I spent a lot of time, and I'll speak about it later here. One of the outcomes of this research actually had something more than just about the districts. Now, in order to, again, I don't understand the complete process, but in order to square this whole land business up, Johnson and whoever else was working on this had to come up with the reallocation of lands for the original proprietors. And this is, there is a book, it's called The Proprietor's Record. This is pages 201, 202, and for example, this is a proprietor. He is one of the original signers of the charter for Essex. Most of these guys never showed up, okay? They were land speculators. So this is a proprietor, here's another proprietor. And Johnson shows on these, in this book, and I'll show the next slide will be a little clearer here, how the land was reallocated in order to come up with one share for Andrew Wiggins, 330 acres. One share for Joseph Wright, 330 acres. Also, in all of these boilerplate charters, there was good old Benny, you know, he was he had to get his piece. He got 500 acres, okay? So here's Benny Wentworth's share. And then there was also the standard, this was the Incorporated Society, they got a share. Glebe land for the Church of England, the First Settled Minister, they got a share, and the town school got a share of 330 acres. This is a close-up of that piece, the town school. So the way this is set up, here was the page number that described in that proprietor's record, and whether this particular lot number, in this case, the top line, this is lot number 12. It's the whole of lot 12, and it is going to be the town of Essex for school, and that's 100 acres. This one is the whole of lot 69. Town of Essex, 120.5, etc., to come up with the 330 acres for the town share. So now we have 4 different parcels. Some of them are, you know, 100, 120 acres, 90, only 12.5 acres here. But anyway, there's land that's allocated for the schools. Does not mean that that's where you're going to build a school, okay? Because depending on what the town fathers would choose to do, they could sell the land or rent it or whatever in order to make funds. These are where those 4 lots show up. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? You know, where it doesn't make any sense, okay? It almost was like these were the parcels that were kind of left over, and I suspect that Johnson and Company used these leftover pieces to make up the parts for those odd parts, the glebe land and the First Minister, etc. So, to the best of my knowledge, there was never a school built here or here, and this is right down next to Hubbell's Falls, and indeed there was a schoolhouse here early on, and then interestingly, this land later was rented to Mr. John Johnson and one of his partners. So, I found that interesting. Here we are in 1812. We're starting to split land. They're starting to split districts up again. And so the way these maps are set up is, you can see this is a dotted line. So this is the new district that was established. And it split between, the northeast district was split out. So exactly, again, you can see how the description, it talks about between 2 roads by Samuel Bradley's, Westford, Gideon Thomas, etc. So what exactly was the rationale? How these came up to the town meeting? You know, was it predetermined that was going to be an article? Usually, the town warning said to discuss the division of reallocate or discuss, if necessary, school districts boundaries. So it was like a broad term. So it was like it was almost spontaneous action at the time of the meeting when these were done. 1816, we're starting to split even more. Down here, we've split this district up, making the districts a little smaller. And this is the first time that the descriptions were using specific residents in order to define a school district. And it lists all of the names of the folks that were going to be in this West District. So it's almost like maybe these folks got together and said, okay, we want to have a district. Again, there's autonomy within the districts. 1820, we reduced from 10 to 9, the Onion River District that was previously was down here in this lower right, that got absorbed. And, guess what? Kids grow. The demographics change. So maybe they say, wait, we don't want to sustain a district here anymore. Maybe we can, who knows? The rationale was not ever real clear as why some of these changes were made. Here's an example of how someone said 52 scholars in the north, which public money needed to be allocated. So there was the school laws that said that there had to be a penny on the dollar allocated for schools. Again, not completely clear in the records, but the town did gather tax money and then would allocate it to the districts, apparently by numbers of students is what it appears to be. Again, the scholar counts, and this was the part that this is the piece that's about the evolution of the school district. This is the appendix. The appendix is actually bigger than the historic piece because it includes all of the student scholar reports for all of these districts. So going through some of the districts were missing. Some years they were missing. I captured everything that I could. Again, transcribing, and I'll have a picture of some of these records. Another thing is the highway surveyors were aligned with the school districts. Highway surveyors basically your town road commissioners, but each district had their own highway surveyor, were responsible for maintaining the highways in the district. They would, sometimes the reports would say number of weeks that school was kept, and it ranged from 12 weeks to 36 weeks. Again, that might have been part of a formula for allocation of the monies. Town records, again, were not real clear on that. This is a little hard to read, but you can get an idea of, this is 1801 up to 1820. You can see there's how the expansion of the school districts, you can see just by the slope of the chart here. The number of students didn't necessarily change all that much. Here in 1806 there's 320, 1807 350, 1820 409. So not necessarily from 1807 to 13 years only gained about 41 people, 41, well, excuse me, about 50 students. Town population, 729 in 1800, 957 in 1810, a little over 1,000 in 1820. Here we are in 1822. How many people know George Tyler, one of the village trustees? George established, and this is of course not the George Tyler we know, but anyway, they voted that George Tyler of Essex set off as a school district by himself. Okay, 6 scholars in 5 in 1823. It was independent. He was the trustee. I call this the first example of homeschooling. So this, and we'll see that ultimately this district, his district got absorbed into another district, as his kids grew up. Here's an example, residents giving liberty to separate from the district to where they now belong. So people say, hey, I don't want to be out of here. So that would relieve them of the obligation of supporting the district or whatever. Again, who knows the motivation for some of these decisions. There's another one, Westerly School District shall have their equal share of public money amounting to the number of scholars in said districts as they would have been entitled had they not been set off as a district. So that's a little confusing the way it's worded, but again, it's clear that the money allocations were by scholar counts, and sometimes there was confusion about where some scholars might be. I mean, after all, you know, did they really, if you lived right here, did you really know, are you in this district or are you in this district? You know, exactly where was that line? 1824. To set off 8 families in North Essex town, set off 210 lots, Ira and Amos Blood, so on, by the name of Shacksboro District. First and only time I have ever seen that notation for that area of town. I've talked to other folks who have done Essex research. No one has ever seen that notation for that area, Shacksboro. Here's a few more items that, you know, from the various meetings. This was kind of like the standard phrase in the warning, to examine into the situation of school districts in the town of Essex. So they kind of left it open. Do we want to talk about it? And boy, there were a couple times they did talk about it. And as a matter of fact, this is an example. Of course, sometimes, as we all know, it's trying to interpret what is not written to try to get to the understanding of what's going on here. So here, now, they've gone outside the town to pick somebody from Westford, Milton, and Jericho as a committee to examine the school districts. Okay? The town hires consultants to do this, all right? Well, they wanted some independent examination of these school districts. So here in April, they voted not to accept the doings of the committee, okay? And they also agreed to not pay the committee. So then, another thing with these town records is that it's clear the way that things are recorded, that they're not always recorded in a timely manner. You'll find marriages squeezed in, you know, a date of a marriage might be squeezed in 2 years after the marriage actually occurred and so on. Some of these entries, like I say, were not always timely. This was an example. It was written in different ink, different handwriting, and said George Tyler, they agreed to pay the expenses of the, so these people, these citizens stepped forward and said, wait a minute, this isn't right. You know, we're going to pay these people. So, okay, yeah, didn't move on me here. What's going on here? Here we go. April 1820, a year later, they actually voted to pay. The town said, well, maybe we should pay them. So they did. This is another example where they made some adjustments in the districts. And here they had another committee. Again, these are folks not from Essex. Heman Allen, Ethan Allen's brother. But no, he was
dead now. I think it's a son of one of the other brothers.
Oh, son of one of the other brothers. Anyway, he was related to Ethan, apparently a lawyer. Another guy from Westford, and this Deacon Amos, to make alder. So again, they're looking for somebody outside to help them with establishing the districts, and voted that the decision shall be final and decisive. Here we are, 1826. Voted to reconsider the vote from the mayor and gave the decision. The vote was challenged and it was not decided legally. So, you know, any concerns about reconfiguring the school districts, it remained unresolved. So you wonder about exactly how intense some of these meetings might have been. The recording secretary, I'm sure, wasn't versed in shorthand to capture every last comment. Example about public money belonging to the 10th school district. They wanted some money. This is the first mention of the 10th school district. Most times when there was a new district established, they would actually define it, as we've seen previously. New district was designated Four Corners, and this is when George Tyler got absorbed into the Four Corners district. And see, he was 5 years, he had 5 to 6 scholars doing his homeschooling. They got old enough, whatever. This new fort had 59 scholars, and Daniel Tyler was the district clerk. I'm not sure, but I believe that maybe was his son. I love this phrase. 1827 occurred an unprecedented ebullition of school legislation. This is from Stone, and this is when things started changing substantially as far as records and so on. Authorized and empowered and directed to divide such town into as many school districts as convenient, and to alter the same, create new as expedient, and school districts shall be numbered. We're going to get away from this geographic and compass-oriented nomenclature. It directed some specific course of instruction, required superintending committees to be established, to have oversight of teachers, report data on to the state, number of districts, teachers, scholars, time of school kept, funding, etc. So now, so there's still autonomy within the districts, but now they've got some reporting requirements for the state. So this is the first superintendent committee. Again, you'll recognize some of these names: Morgan, Kellogg, Butler, and this is how these districts were renumbered. Okay, Southwest became 1, and so on. You often hear the center district as being talked about as district number 6, and that district number 6, that the district numbering ends up being used many times to refer to numerous government entities like the highway surveyors and so on. Excuse me. And later on, when there was the village of Essex Center established as a water district, and they said the area formerly defined as district number 6. And here's Shacksboro district, still hanging around here, but now they're number 11. Here we go, we're doing some more subdividing of the areas, and here's this map shows you the district name and its new number. Shacksboro became number 11. The middle district became number 6, etc. This is an example of how the reporting, again, this is transcribed out of the town records, the districts, the trustees' name. Now there were no trustees because they were now under one committee. There was no longer trustees within each district. Each district still had a clerk, and they reported their scholars. Excuse me. Here we had 3 scholars that went up to, anybody familiar in Westford, it's called Bowman Corners. It's just over the line in Westford. So there were 3 students that lived in Essex that went up to the Westford School District. And I'm sure that the Westford School got the appropriate enumeration necessary for those 3 students. 537 students here in 1828. This is, let's see, district number 8 in Middle District. This is how the students were reported in the town record. Now, if you're a genealogist, this can be great, okay? And that's what this other, this appendix that I have here, I've captured all of these entries. So in the Northwest District, this is the person, Noah Taylor had 1. John Halbert had 5. These are 5 students between the age of 5 and 18. And this is how it was reported. Down here, again, this was not consistent, but frequently they would say 28 weeks, 16 weeks taught by a woman and 12 by a man. School kept 7 months. 1830, we're starting to split up again here. Shacksboro District gets split up. Well, excuse me, it's District 11 now. That gets split up into a separate district. 5, 6, and 12 had organizational meetings, and the organizational meetings were attended by at least one selectman usually. And this is the first mention of District 12, but there was nothing in the town record where it was explicitly defined. So everything that happened as far as district being set up was not always detailed in the town record. And we'll see how some of that comes about. So I determined where District 12 was by using some of those names that were on the list of scholars reported and looking at the titles, the names that were on the different plots of land. As I've said numerous times, the school funding was not expressly shown in the town records. Here's where there were 2 votes. First to raise 5 cents on the dollar grant, and then voted to raise 1 cent on it. It did not say explicitly school funding, but it appears that the second vote was for school funding. And because this Legislative Act 1810 said, shall be the duty to assess a tax of 1 cent on the dollar for the purpose of schooling. So this and this kind of align. Schoolhouses, early histories, log cabins, other buildings, and as I said, when was it 1788 or whatever, maybe the first schoolhouse. Well, in Butler's history, he says, if tradition informs us correctly. Well, you know, there's no details in town records. This is the first mention of the word schoolhouse that I found in the town record. It wasn't until 1830, where they were going to have a meeting at the schoolhouse near the dear Dr. Powell's. Again, the individual districts controlled their buildings. And one of the things in, I can't remember, it was at 2001, Mary O'Neill did a paper for her studies at UVM, and she did an extensive paper describing the early schoolhouses in the town of Essex. And primarily her paper was talking about schoolhouses from the middle 1850s on, because that's when there was more information about where the schoolhouses were, primarily because of Beer's Atlas maps, which showed schoolhouses. This is more examples of district businesses, and this is to see if a district will vote to raise money on the grand list to build a schoolhouse in said district. Again, their own autonomy, they're the ones that are determining when they're going to build a schoolhouse, and they had to raise the money in addition to what they were getting for each of the scholars. And then this was this was sometimes the case. They would have a note like this: the inhabitants would convene agreeable to warning and made choice of Herman Butler Hurlbut clerk for the year ensuing. There wasn't any notation whether they did or did not decide to raise the money. It was not unusual to find these omissions. Again, both of these entries are squeezed in between 1834. So it's like after the fact. So let's see, what did we do? Do we not? Well, anyway. So it was not always that business was not always clearly entered. I'm going to examine the school teachers in 1832. Didn't find any more similar entries to that until 1846. So were they examining the school teachers every year or not? Probably, maybe. They were pretty consistent on recording the scholar counts. And again, I've captured that. They had a warning to consider another district, but they didn't take any action. Here they set one of these, Heman Pryor, and they moved him into another district. These were the kinds of things that would show up in the records. Here they're divided a school district, made another split in districts. And so in 1837, now we've got 13, I believe it's 13 districts. And yeah, this district was really hard to define. Notice some of these, you know, they really do zigzag and follow property line boundaries. You know, here pretty much had to just draw straight lines because it was not completely clear. Here's when setting off a section of Alder Brook. They actually misspoke in recording the town record, voted to set off all of the families west of the brook near Eli Smith. Well, west should have been east. If you're familiar with the map, it just didn't work. Didn't have their compass on hand that day, I guess. Another example, they set off people to different districts to see if alterations were needed. The article passed. Don't know what they were. 1841-42, records became illegible. They faded, usually lousy ink or whatever. But this is now when starting to, my goal was to try to have it, the capture of the students, scholars, and the school district business as comprehensive as possible. And it started getting into these years when I could not read the records. I could read maybe some of the districts, but not all. So this is when the study really started to, you know, because again, well, it says to 1867, but really after the middle 1840s, things were not as consistent in the records. And in this year, 21 scholars are being sent to Westford, District Number 1. This is an example of the way the recordings were in the town record. If you've ever read script, old script, it can be fun. I copied the information as recorded, and I might go from year to year and I would see the spelling of someone's name change, but I always recorded it as I found it in the record. And again, you'd have the person's name, George Farrand. He had 2 students. Warren, looked like, I think that's Bliss, had 3. Somebody had 5, and so on. And then this is the list of scholars recorded, yada yada. Also, in 1843, they you can see that total 1843, total 72, district number 4, 72, and there were 21 that went to Westford. Excuse me. So this is district number 4, right here, district number 4, total of 72. David Kellogg was the clerk. Here we are. We split off again to see if alterations need District 7, and so a new division has occurred here. See if alterations needed Districts number 7, 9, 10, 4, and 7. Well, they had 2 7s, so I call it a pen hole. The pen didn't write, you know, like typo. Okay, so they voted to adjust the boundary of District number 1. Now, this is another example to set the road from the center of the big hollow to the center of the little hollow to District number 1, and set Farrand Hills to District number 14. I haven't got a clue where Big Hollow is, or Little Hollow, or Farrand Hills. And I'm not sure if any of our other history folks have come across those designated districts or areas of town. Again, again, approximation of where the boundary really was. So this example right here, to set Nathan Wood at Dennis Shaw to District 9 to draw their public money. And it appears that scholars went to districts other than the ones where they resided. And so again, if you were right here, if you lived right here, how would you know whether you went to 5 or 2 or 1? And who were your neighbors and who were your friends? And so how did that get sorted out? 1843, there are 14 districts reporting scholars, 16 reporting scholars in 1844 and 45. 1844, highway surveyors are aligned with 17 districts. Okay? So they're reporting 16, but they got 17 highway surveyors. So how did they know where to go? 1844, they set up a committee to determine the boundaries of the several school districts in the town. And they were also charged with determining the highway districts. Now, let's get this settled here as to where the highway surveyors are, where they're aligned with the districts. They made a couple other adjustments here, and this would occur frequently where they're going to set lots 10, 11, 12 to number 2 and so on. Just actually, okay, we're going to put these lots over here in this district, etc. See if the town will accept the report of the committee to determine the bounds of the several school districts in town. 1844, they set up the committee. 1845, to see if they would to accept the boundary. No action was taken. Again, to me, it appears that it was not noted in the town record. So were those boundaries really accepted or not? And here we can start to see, I don't want to say, I'm not sure if the right word is erosion, but districts 1 through 14 and 16 reported scholars, 15 on the Westford reported 12 scholars were set to Westford. So there's only 1 through 14, no 15, and where's 17? Well, we're not sure. How many were there at that point? In the Essex Historical Society, there is this document, terrific document, that was the results of that committee that we talked about. And there's 16 pages of details that describe the school districts for a total of 16 districts. In these descriptions, now they use lot numbers, rivers, road names, etc., not just property owners. Occasionally they would use a property owner name, but so it was a little easier to actually reproduce these boundaries based on their description. The last page of the document was signed by Pearl Castle and D. Morgan. There was space for 1 or 2 more signatures. It wasn't clear. Anyway, in 1845, they decided to pay the committee that did that redivision, and these were the folks that were involved. Again, Castle, Morgan, and then Watkins. This is a page from that report. And so this is for school district number 1, and begins at the west. I won't read the whole thing here, but you get a feel. Begins at the westerly corner on the north bank of Onion River. Beginning at the westerly corner of lands owned by E.G. Stanton. Recognize that, Polly? Yes. On the north bank of Onion River, so-called. This is down in the south west corner of Essex. Thence on a westerly line of and so as to include said Stanton's land and lands owned by Samuel Dinsmore, etc., etc. Okay? So this was how district number 1 was defined. This is confusing, but this was one of from Allen. It said, in practice, boundaries had a way of getting eroded for convenience sake. And so what's shown here, there are 15 total districts, and this is before and after the committee report. It's busy. The dotted lines represent the committee report, and the solid lines are the boundaries that I had determined for that sequential process of keeping track of how the boundaries changed. So, for example, district number 1 down here, I'd shown district number 1 like this, the report came out and had it like this, basically. So relatively similar. Some of these changed quite a bit. But district number 12, that didn't hardly change at all from what I had determined initially. District number 6 continued to remain very large. And I noticed as I was looking at this map the other day, I forgot to put a boundary in here, but this would have been District 6. And as I noted, you know, the reporting was inconsistent, on again, off again on teacher assessments. The scholar reports were less frequent. Were they not required, or were they reported elsewhere? There was a little bit more administrative information. Teacher salaries were shown sometimes, whether they were male or female. And of course, the men got paid more than the females did. Incidental expenses, etc. 1848-49, no scholar reports for districts 10, 12, 14, and 15. Was school not kept here? But District 14 reported 31 scholars in 1946. So how do you go from 31 to none? You know, again, I think just the information was just not recorded. Districts were united. This is the, I call it the district shuffle of 1850. Look at the sequence of dates here. Yeah, this must have been a real heated time. Anyway, they started out by consider uniting districts 10 and 14. They didn't take any action on that. There was no number assigned. Then it said, okay, to set widow Rosina Bliss and the inhabitants east of her house to a new district. I couldn't figure out where she lived, let alone what was east of her house. Anyway, April 2nd, make alterations to school districts, no action taken. April 11th, to organize school district number 17, and it was held as was noted. And 13th, to act upon following petition to set John Thompson, Catherine, and Elaine data. So I'm going to move on here because you'll see. Now, April 27th, 1850, and here's a summary of all of that stuff. District 17 was created by splitting off a portion of District number 9. Then District 17 was reduced in size. Some inhabitants returned to District 9. District 17 existed until 1855, then reabsorbed into District 9. So that happened, they warned and rewarned this meeting over like a, what was the first, like from April 2nd, 1850 to April 27th. They had like 4 different meetings or whatever as they bounced this around to finally settle out where this district would be. This was District 17, and here's how they reported. Nothing in 51, but 50, 22, 17, 28, and then after 1854, nothing reported by district number 17. And 17, that's the largest number of districts ever established in Essex, was 17 districts. The boundary here was eliminated between 9 and 17. I got ahead of myself there, but so that number 17 was absorbed into district number 9. Now there were 16 districts. 1851-61, again, town records are faded, really can't get a complete comprehensive assessment of the school business. Again, this would frequently be in the warning to see if alterations are needed. No major changes, occasionally move an individual from one district to another. The superintendents were chosen, talked about teachers' licenses were reported, and again, once in a while somebody would be set off from one district to another. And there were some scholar reports, but not comprehensively. Here's where they were accepting a student from Williston into district number 14 in Essex. And some of the Williston students continued to go to Essex schools up until at least 1862. Here's the scholar counts for 1852. So 13 districts reporting. You can see here we got gaps here, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15. There were no reports. 13 districts total. And this was from a state, a Vermont school report, said that instead of a disposition to multiply districts, a tendency, the reverse of this, now happily prevails in the state. So across the state, there was more consolidation of districts. Geographically, Benning Wentworth, well, the charters for most of the towns were 6 square miles, 36, 6 by 6, 36 square miles. So if you look at other towns, like Charlotte, Heinsberg, Milton, they're all 36 square miles, and Beers Atlas shows most all of those towns have 14 districts each. So that seems to be about geographically about right to fit with that common assumption. You want to have the school districts of such a size that they're within walking distance. So 14, so that's one of the reasons I think why people say, how many school districts, whether we're 14? Because that is kind of a common number that shows up a lot. But remember, there was only 14 for a period of time, and it varied all over the place. Essex population 1830-50, 25% increase, 1644 to 2052. And then guess what happened, 1850, 1860 for the out-migration. It decreased by 7%. In 1880, Essex population is only 2104. So in 30 years, gain a whole, 52 people. Okay, not a lot going on here. 1843, there were 718 scholars. 1860, only 562. Okay, so the parents went away, took their young kids with them too. Schoolhouse, and this was from Butler's history. Schools and schoolhouses multiplied till at present day, around 1865 when he wrote this, there are 16 districts, though not as many schools in active operations. So there was some notation or note that there were these districts, but they didn't necessarily all keep school. Through 1860 to 1867, more school information started to show up with teacher reviews, student reports, and so on. And this was interesting. Beginning in 1862, scholar reports included names of each scholar, not just the number of scholars by family. So they would list the Brown family, and then they would list John, June, Julie, and whoever. And they would list all of the names of the kids. Again, if you're a genealogy buff, this is terrific information, okay? It really, and they only did that for a little bit. And I'm not sure what the rationale was, but again, good information. Again, there's, we're going to set off a piece of land here to that district. That was continuing to happen. But now, this is where, I cut it off. Okay, I could not, without doing land record research, title research, and so on, could not determine really where the boundaries got adjusted to, because when they would make the adjustments, they would start again to use people's names. We're going to move the boundary to the north property line of Joe Brown or whatever. So you can see the activity. 13 districts received funding, 65, 12 in 66, 14 in 1 through 14 in 1866 received funding. Let's see, 14 total. Okay, I guess I might have a typo here. Maybe that should be 1867. But anyway, again, not all districts were active or receiving funding. District 15 was eliminated in 1866. Here's the 1867 school districts. Now these are boundaries that are based on that 1844 reconfiguration that seemed to be the most comprehensive reconfiguration that had been done. 15 districts numbered 1 through 14 and 16. No district 15. 1869 is when the Beers Atlas was published. And again, that showed 14 districts. And Beers didn't know any more than people that were living in the districts. So they just drew straight lines. Here was the schoolhouse. They knew where the schoolhouse was. And they said, okay, this seems about right. And so they drew these lines. They probably got some information from the residents. But at any rate, their boundary lines are straight. We'll see in the next map here. So the committee report, again, of 1845 defined these boundaries, and they followed the property lines. They didn't draw a straight line. Boundary updates show 15 districts. Boundaries still existed, although the districts might not have been active. It's a key. Somebody talks to you, or somebody says, well, we had 14 districts. Well, what year was that? Or what years were that? Because it varied. Again, this is a little crazy, but you need to be careful if you're using Beers Atlas as a guide to where a school district was. As I said, the black lines represent that those boundaries are defined in the 1844 report. They follow property lines, they zigzag. Beers Atlas tend to be straight lines. Those are the dotted lines. So you can see that they always didn't align with that 1844 report, which I feel is probably the most comprehensive report of where the districts actually, the boundaries of the districts actually existed. So, what are the conclusions? Geographic boundaries, scholar information, the original purpose was to define where the boundaries were and so on, to get a handle on that. The scholar information was a real bonus. Once I started capturing that, I continued and have that information available. And by the way, this report, this is available at the Historical Society. They have copies of this. And again, as I've noted, beyond 1860, it was difficult to try to determine boundaries without really digging deep into land records. And what was the rationale? Who knew? They didn't record the emotions or the rationale necessarily in the mean, but population density, teacher availability, convenience, cost, student totals. They didn't necessarily always have a schoolhouse. They were probably teaching in somebody's house or their barn or something or other. So what were all of the issues that went into determining where a district would be? And the why, these were primarily Northern European folks that had moved up here. They were continuing that European tradition. Education was important. And the Vermont Constitution included education entries. That was an important part of establishing communities. So the school districts, the last small school closed in 1957. That's the Griffin School, that district number 2, and that's the one that's over there on Route 2A there, right? As you get off the Cirque Highway and you hang a left, and it's that little house that sits there. That's the Griffin School. That was the last small schoolhouse, closed in 1957. Not that all that long, well, for most of us, not all that long ago. So what happened to districts between 1860 and 1850s? Again, remember I cut it off in about 1867. So, there's 90 years there that there was still these dynamics going on with districts. So history repeats itself. In 1796, there was one school district in Essex. Remember that northeast corner? In 2020, we now have one school district. That's it. And again, if you want to look at this map, it's really a fascinating map, I think. And I also have some copies of some of the town records showing scholar reports and so on that you're more than welcome to have a look at.
We have some questions.
Sure.
First of all, I think 100 years from now, people are still going to be looking back at your research. I think this is fantastic. Have you put in any record of an individual teacher being named going through any of this?
No, I did not. I did not happen to see explicitly teachers' names. I think I saw like the superintendent name. I'm trying to recall now. They had some evaluation of teachers, and I think they might have said they evaluated X number of teachers or whatever, but I don't remember seeing names.
I've seen one case of a teacher being named for being certified, which was in the law that they could certify teachers, but
Yeah.
one case.
Yeah, they did. They had a process where it wasn't a slam dunk. You had to have at least prove some kind of credentials to be able to teach. I did find a letter at UVM, a letter written by a school teacher that was applying for a job, and I think the letter was written to Mr. Castle, and it talked about the expectation of room and board and so on, and but no, don't recall seeing names explicitly.
But you can say there were men and women teachers.
Yes, men and women teachers. Yep. And as I remember one note there, it had one school district had so many weeks taught by male, so many weeks taught by female, and when they said school was kept for so many weeks, that didn't necessarily mean continuous weeks. And I'm sure, at least I expect, not unlike other agricultural communities, which Essex was, that when it came harvest time and so on, that you needed people working on the land, and so maybe you didn't keep school at certain times of the year. So.
Hubie, do you know how many schoolhouses are still existing today in Essex?
No, I don't know, but Mary O'Neill, in her paper, she got into that in pretty good detail. I remember there was one schoolhouse that was, again, I believe that ultimately these schoolhouses became under the control of the town, okay? And she had details about when land was deeded to the town for a school and so on, and that I remember there was one schoolhouse that was ended up, when it was no longer used as a school, they used it as the town garage or something like that. So she has some of those details to say that this schoolhouse is now the resident of such and such and such and such. So
Two on Pearl Street in the village.
are there? Yeah. And again, that her paper, a copy of that is at the museum, I think, and so yeah, it was again rather extensive. So one of the I hesitate to say this, but I'm going anyway. The 1805 schoolhouse that sits over here, again, that was determined as 1805 approximately, based somewhat on school records, etc. And when Mary did her piece, she misidentified its location. She had misinterpreted directions that were provided in Butler's history, actually. But at any rate, her history really starts in the 1840s and 50s. 1805 was much too early. She didn't pick that up. Okay, so 1805 schoolhouse used to sit up here on Bixby Hill. That's a whole other story. So
the district that was a something borough district, where was that?
Shacksboro, that's up Old Pump Road, is it? Sleepy Hollow, Old Pump Road, up in the north, the very northeast corner of where you have to come in from Jericho. Yeah. A portion of that area. Sawmill Road. Yeah, yeah, it's Shacksboro. Never just saw that for those 4 or 5 years where it was listed scholars, and that's it. Never saw it again.
That's a project to be done, because there's still several foundations. The Brigham Hill one is still there, the one in Indian Brook is still there.
Yeah.
So it'd be a fun project to put them all together. And where are they?
Yeah, and they probably moved some too. You know, I mean, that's it was not uncommon to move buildings around. So there's always something to do.
Schoolhouse number 9 is still standing on Naylor Road.
Naylor, yes, you're right. Yes, yep, that's correct. Yep, yep. That's one of the things is schoolhouses. We like to think of them as being red with a bell on top and big windows. You know, and not always the case, but that's one way to easily identify some of those older schools. So any other? I don't have the winning lottery numbers, but if I did, I wouldn't share them anyway. But so. Any other questions? And again, like I say, these documents are at the museum. If you want to see them and have a look at this map, it's really quite interesting.